From rare diseases to reductionism, we're now going to go to Woody Allen's favorite subject, death. Now our next speaker, Harriett Warshaw, is the executive director of the Conversation Project. I almost turned you into John Muir.
Not bad.
Conversation Project. And the conversation she wants you to have is a conversation about how you would like your life to end. And she has a starter kit in the back, which she would like you to take a look at. Not so fast.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So Harriett thought she was off the hook because there's not much on the internet about her. All right. And so what do you do when you can't find stuff? Well, the answer is you make it up. So from indoor record holder for Girl Scout cookie sales to Olympic pole vaulting champion to Wellesley Planning Board, which is a fact.
That is a fact.
All right. Harriett Warshaw is going to talk about something that she would like us all to take seriously. My wife has tried to get me to take this seriously as well. And I'm not good at it, all right? She has said, sort of, honey, what do you want me to do with you when the time comes? And I've said, honey, I've been gardening this yard for 50 years. Throw me on the compost pile. At least I'll do some good. So with that silly introduction to a very serious subject, Harriett Warshaw.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, there could have been a good response to that, to the compost pile, you know. You're really full of shit. But thank you, and thank you, Larry, Meredith, Zoe, for inviting the Conversation Project to be part of this quite eclectic group, I would say. And when I first met Larry, I thought, what was he thinking? But I think I'm beginning to see a pattern here. I think we've got something going here. So, and I want to thank all of you for all the wonderful work that you've done in your professional life of extending our lives, whether it's 20 or 30 years over the last generation. And you'll hear through my stories that my family has been the beneficiary of all of your wonderful work. But as the satirical online site The Onion says, the death rate stays steady at 100%. So we know that everybody in this room will participate in that event together. And so because we're a public engagement campaign, we don't feel that we have all the answers, and so we want to engage you in this hour together, 45 minutes together. And what I'd like you to do is to find your new best friend in your rows next to you, introduce yourself, and respond to our host's question that he wisely posed in my presentation on the agenda of why you think this conversation is really important. Because we know all of you have stories, and for about 5 minutes, I want you to share with each other why you think this conversation is important, because I'm not going to be the only one giving the answer to Larry, our host's question, and then we'll come back together. So not 10 minutes, but 5 minutes. Why do you think this conversation is important, and something you would like to learn from the presentation today? Go. Find a friend. Find a friend. Come on. Come on. Find a friend. The end of life, what you want at the end of your life. Read the thing. Read my thing. You have, okay. So you gotta get them engaged. No one to talk to? So what's important to you at the end of your life? How do you? This is the hardest part of my presentation. Yoo-hoo! Thank you for getting engaged in the conversation. So, is there anybody brave enough here? I'm just going to ask one or two of you. Anybody brave enough to share any thoughts, any observations about that? Getting to know a new best friend and sharing what's important to you at the end of your life. You didn't even know what the question was.
So the two of us both agreed we just want to take a long hike.
Great.
With and without a sleeping bag and without
woods.
much water, and just head out and there it is.
All right. Great. Did everybody hear that? It's a Boulder-esque answer, right? Anybody else?
Our discussion up here was about fairness. Fairness to the individual, fairness to the family, fairness to society.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to switch. Anybody want to share with me what you'd like to learn from this 45 minutes we have together?
What are all the options available?
What are all the options available? Okay. Okay. Anybody else?
How do we talk to our partner, our spouse, and how do we talk to our children?
Great. There's one more up there. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to cut it off. She said she wanted to know what her dad wanted her to do with him at the end. Is that right? Yeah.
Why is not a fundamental question asked to all of us that Americans have, like for instance in the Netherlands, where I'm from, the right to enter life and the last stage.
Okay.
And when we talk about being patient-centered, that is also patient-centered.
Okay, we'll get back to that point. Okay,
I want to know if I have dementia and I change my mind or I have a moment of lucidity about how I want to die, then how will anyone understand that?
Great question. Okay, that's it. I've got to go. Or you'll never have lunch. I mean, it's your choice. Okay. So the one direction that Larry did give me was share my story through my family. And so there's circa Stern, the Stern family, circa 1962. I'm that adorable young woman with the braces on. I was 12 years old. And I'm not going to go through individually, but I'm going to sprinkle my family's story throughout the discussion that we're going to have together. Because all of you have stories too. We're just going to use mine. It's Passover. This is Passover, if anybody was wondering. We always had 40 people. Took all the furniture out of the living room. So I'm going to share the story through my family. Okay. So someone up here said, well, what was the conversation? What was the question? And I forgot that I didn't even tell you, but the Conversation Project, what is it? So the Conversation Project is a national public engagement campaign dedicated to ensuring that everybody has the opportunity to both express their end-of-life care wishes and have them respected. Simple, short, to the point. expressed, and respected. But how do you do that? I mean, how does that get operationalized? So I'm going to give you a little bit of our history to put it in some context. So I don't know if people here, if the name Ellen Goodman resonates with anybody. If you're a woman of a certain age in particular, you probably know her. But she is a Pulitzer Prize-winning author. She was a columnist for 30 years, chronicled social change. She, like probably everybody in this room, became a caregiver for her mother. She and her mother were very close. They talked about everything. If Ellen was here today, she'd say they talked about clothes and boys and sex and everything, but what did they not have a conversation about? What her mom wanted at the end of her life. How she wanted to live, not die, live at the end of her life. And so when Ellen became that caregiver, she was asked a myriad of questions about the kind of care to have provided to her mother. Antibiotics, tests, shots. I'm sure you can all relate to this if you've ever cared for a parent. And she would say that she was blindsided by all of these questions. And she really wished that she had had the conversation with her mom to guide her through this process. And so when her mother died, Ellen went to the head of the facility where her mom was living at the time of her death, at Hebrew Senior Life in Boston, to a wonderful guy named Len Fishman, who, to his credit, instead of getting defensive, said, Ellen, you're absolutely right. This is a problem not only for you as the caregiver and the family member who have to figure this out and then grieve afterwards. It's a problem for the patient, and it's a problem for the whole healthcare system. So together, they decided to bring together a group of friends, see what everybody's experience was, do a little focus group. And lo and behold, there were fell into two camps. Those who had had the conversation, they articulated the experience of end of life with their loved ones as a good death. And those who had not had that conversation, they said it was a difficult death. Now, that is not to say that we're not all sad, we don't all grieve, we do. But if you don't have that conversation, and if you don't feel like you've honored your loved one's end-of-life care wishes, the likelihood is much greater that there's lingering grief and questions that, quite frankly, can never be answered, because they're gone. There's no going back on that one. So there was somebody at that meeting who worked at the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. They went and got a meeting with Don Berwick, who headed up IHI at the time. It was supposed to be a half-an-hour meeting. It turned into 2 hours, as the folklore goes. He was smitten by the idea, thought it was right on, and he brought together thought leaders from all over the country on advanced care planning to ask the question, what has to happen to move the needle on advanced care planning, and how can we make it better? And the thought leaders who had been working on this for 20 years, and I guess you had somebody last year talk about this, they've done a great job in the last 20 years, but there's clearly a long way to go. What would move the needle? And they all said there had to be a push from the outside in. In other words, they had to engage the public and activate the public. And that nothing would change until you had an activated public. And then it would give the medical community coverage and a kick in the tush to move and make these changes. So with that, Ellen and IHI created this concept of the Conversation Project. And she thought about it, and I hate to use this analogy in this room with these people, but a double helix of change. And if it's wrong, don't throw the arrows at me. But we envision this as the double helix of pushing from the outside, from the public and the healthcare system pushing on the other side to make the change together. So that was their thought process. So it was all about creating a culture of change, both by the public and inside the healthcare system. And to be sure, there was no taking a position on what you should want at the end of your life. So you could want everything. You want the latest chemotherapy, the biggest cocktail of chemotherapy, that would be great. If you wanted to take a hike, go up the mountain, go on an iceberg, fine. Just tell somebody so that you were back in control of the situation. And she likened this to the birthing movement of the 70s. I don't know how many of you had children during the 70s. I happened to start my career at the Boston Hospital for Women, an OBGYN hospital, Harvard Teaching Hospital, heart of conservative medicine. When I started, no husbands, there was husbands then, not partners, but husbands were in the delivery room. And then women said, we're not delivering there anymore until you allow husbands into the delivery room. It was nothing that the medical community did. Nothing, I can assure you. And when we were told that those women were going to have babies at home, overnight I was writing policies of letting the husbands into the delivery room, along with the candles and the camcords and the mirrors and the warm bathtubs. You know, that's how it changed. So that's the analogy that Ellen likes to draw. So the question is, why is this such a problem? And 2 years ago, we did a national study, and you can see from up here, 90% of us want to have this conversation, and yet only 27% are having the conversation. And the question is why, and we'll go into that. But some other reasons why this conversation, why this is so important, is that we know that in Massachusetts, only 17% of people are having this conversation. You hear me? This conversation with their doctors. And in California, it's something like 8%. So hardly anybody is talking about this. So we sort of have this conspiracy of silence, which really impacts the way clinical care creates goals of care for us at the end of our lives. So how do you go about creating cultural change? So we came up with a two-part strategy, and the public came up with the third part. So Ellen, being very media savvy, the first priority was a robust media campaign, and we've been very fortunate to be in every national journal, newspaper, and social media, traditional media. We were recently featured on a PBS Hour News special. You'll see I have a slide of ABC News with Diane Sawyer. I mean, we've really had wonderful coverage. And now, this year, with Atul Gawande's book, how many people, Being Mortal? I mean, it's been amazing. And now yesterday, or 2 days ago, Tom Brokaw, I don't know if you heard his. So you almost now cannot pick up the newspaper without having some kind of conversation about how we want to live at the end of our lives. The second is the creation of some tools, and we have the starter kit for all of you. So the starter kit was a document that will help you all to think about your values. It's not a medical checkoff list. It's not created through a lens of a clinician. It's for all of us to think about what matters to us, not what's the matter with you, but what matters to us, so that you can go back and talk to your loved ones and paint a picture about what your values are. Because there will never be enough checkoff boxes to decide what kind of care you want. And when you can't talk for yourself, you need to have somebody who knows you well enough to help the doctor create the care plan that would fit your values. So we have the starter kit. You can get it online. It's free of charge in multiple languages. And I'll show you some other tools that we have. And then the third was to bring the Conversation Project to people where they live, work, and pray. And I can assure you, we cannot take credit for it, but I'd like to introduce you to two women who can, because they were one of the first people to call us to say, you've got to bring the Conversation Project to Boulder, Colorado. So we have with us Constance Holden and Jean Abbott, who have just done the most incredible work, and we thank them every day. So, and I'll go into that a little bit. So that was the strategy. So here was, I showed you Diane Sawyer. There's a wonderful video on our website, which they went in and videoed a family having a conversation. Go and watch it because it's very poignant and it really helps give you a mental image of what this can be like. And then, of course, we're always trying to reach out to all age groups, and we're always trying to do very creative and innovative things. And 2 years ago, I heard about this young man out in Seattle, who is an entrepreneur and loved to use, a restaurateur, and loved to use the experience of eating for social change. And so he created this idea of death over dinner, where he'd invite friends to have dinner and have a conversation about end-of-life care issues. And he created this magnificent website. I mean, really, the graphics were beautiful, where a virtual invitation, you send it out to your friends. And so the first year, I thought they were crazy. Really, Meshuggah, who would invite friends over to talk about end-of-life issues? Well, 1,900 crazy people did it, and I did it as well. And I tell you, it was amazing. It was with friends. You never have time to have these intimate conversations with and really clear your decks and talk about things that are really important to you. So next year, I want you all to do this. It's really wonderful. And we will hopefully have a cookbook. We've talked to, really, we're having a cookbook on, what was so funny about it? Was that funny? Oh, no, hemlock, on comfort food. So all these top chefs have sent me their favorite recipes of comfort food. Oh, sorry up there, hemlock, not hemlock. Okay, so this is our tools. As I said, the Conversation Starter Kit, you have that as a sample. Then we have how to talk to your doctor or clinician. And the third one we've just created, unfortunately, at requests of parents, was how to talk to your critically ill children. So it's for parents who have children who are critically ill. That was tough to do, but we've gotten great reviews. It's gone out through the Academy of Pediatrics, their subcommittee on palliative and hospice care. So unfortunately, if you know anybody, at least there's a resource. So they're all available on site. And what makes these unique is what I said, is that they're values-driven. And you bring your own perspective into this. And that's why it transcends cultures as well. I was saying to somebody that every culture says, oh, my culture, we don't want to talk about it. So my grandmother, what did she say? Poo, 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 get rid of the evil eye. We can't talk about death. But it turns out the Native Americans can't talk about it in the teepee. Don't want the death in the house. And the Japanese, it's every religion, because who wants to talk about it? Because people feel like if you talk about it, it'll happen. Sort of like, you can't talk to your kids about sex. You talk about it, you know what, it's going to happen. So, but it doesn't happen that way. So go to our website. Our website is all story-based. You can share your own stories. It's important. There's a lot of resources. There's blogs on there. There's all of our starter kits, our information on how you can get in touch with us. And then the last piece of this community-based piece, which has been extraordinary. We are now working in 200, I think it's 42. I think it keeps going up. Where's Kate? I want to introduce Kate DeBartolo, our national manager, field manager, who oversees all of this and done a remarkable job. And so we are in 42 states, working with whole communities like Boulder, like Contra Costa County in California, like Atlanta, Georgia, Akron, Ohio, right? Akron, Ohio, or Council on Aging, or organizations who people themselves had said, this is so important. We want to share it with our friends and with organizations in our own community. So we're doing that. We're working with businesses because businesses have begun to recognize how important this end-of-life care issue is for not only people who are at their end of their lives, but for their caregivers. They're putting it into their wellness programs as a way of helping caregivers, because if a caregiver can get this right and get it resolved, it diminishes depression after their loved one dies. So we're in Tufts Health Plan is a major health plan in Boston. Dow Chemical. Ellen is speaking to 900 employees of Fidelity next week. We're in good year. And then in the fall, we're going to do a Conversation Sabbath, where in Boston, we've been working with a lot of faith-based communities, and it's been an extraordinary experience. We go in, we review the starter kit, we have people practice, we ask them to go home and have the conversation, we bring them back together to share their experience. What did it feel like? Was it good? Was it bad? Were you able to do it? Were there any surprises? It's a very powerful, and it's all put in the context of their own particular faith and values, and so it's very intimate, very rich. Last Sunday, I was at the mosque, the major mosque in Boston. There were 70 people there. It was an extraordinary experience because the imam put it all into Islamic law. And what did he say? Our brother Abraham and our brother, I can't remember the other one he quoted, but it was from the Bible. You know, it was from my Bible, and the imam was saying this. And I'm going, this is truly remarkable how this transcends our differences and our different tribes, really. It was quite special. I'm sorry? No, it wasn't Mohammed. It was from I think it's like, I can't remember who it was. But anyway, this is really important. The faith leaders are really important in this conversation because many of them are asked to minister and do counseling to families during the heat of a crisis, and then they're to pick up the pieces with family members who have unresolved issues about end-of-life care. It's been so great to be able to work with all of these community groups because there are only 3 of us staffing the Conversation Project, and we never in a million years could have been as creative as the people who are working boots on the ground. It has unleashed so many interesting approaches, from working with the Hispanic coalitions and aging rainbow coalitions and the prisoners and the homeless community. And each community creates their own blueprint for change and how they're going to bring the Conversation Project to their own community. This was a list that Kate put together. Probably we could add 10 more already, Kate, but different organizations that we know that people are working with. Another big group with Fidelity, estate planners. Call it estate planning for the heart. So these are the women who started the Boulder initiative, and I hope you reach out to them today or at another time and think about how people in this room can help spread the Conversation Project. Is that okay with you? Yeah. Okay. So again, my heart goes out to all of them. So I just want to end this section by showing you a diagram that was put together by one of our major, actually, funders, the Cambia Foundation out of Portland. They're doing this project with us, and they sort of conceptualized this, saying that end-of-life care, discussions, wishes, really is a continuum. And if you ask Ellen if this project should have been called the Conversation Project, she said no, it should have been called the Conversations, plural, project, because we know this is just not one conversation that you have with your loved one. It happens over time when you're healthy, when you're living with a chronic illness, and when you're approaching the end of life. And our part here is the expressing it. So we ask people to have this conversation early, often around the kitchen table with your loved ones. whether it's with your adult children. In my case, I had this conversation with my 26 and a 28-year-old, and my daughter Molly started crying. Oh, no, I can't even think about this. And I said, well, we're going out of the country for a month. You've got to think about it. And her brother, Matt, got up, put his arm around her and said, don't worry, Molly, I'll take care of this until you can do it. God, it was sort of worth just seeing that dynamic. But it was funny. But I know it's not an easy conversation to start. And people always ask, how do you start it? How do you bring it up? And what I said to my kids was, and I think this is really true, I'm giving you a gift. I am giving you a gift of certainty of what I want. I never want you in a crisis situation, if anything should happen to me, for you to ever second guess and ever doubt what you're doing. I want you to know. And if you can't do exactly what you think I want, that's okay too. I forgive you right now. Don't worry about it. But you need to start to have the conversation. And it happens over time, and then people ask, why, how can you do it outside of a context, you know? And I say, you gotta start and understand what you need now and what you want now, because God forbid you just never know. You know, those young people running the marathon, they didn't know what was gonna happen to them on that morning of the marathon bombing. And the other reason is sort of like exercising. I mean, if you have to lose that 10 pounds before the wedding, and you start a week or a month before, it's impossible. You know, you just can't do it. But if you start a year and you work up to it, you end up losing the weight, hopefully. So if you start having these very difficult conversations early, and you have them regularly over time, then it's normalized, and everybody can have it when they have to have it under a crisis situation. I don't know about you, but do you know of friends, not your families, but friends who've had experiences where the siblings totally disagreed, and in the ICU they were fighting with each other? Anybody know that scenario? Yeah, I mean, it happens. So you really have to have these early, often around the kitchen table with as many people at the same time, so everybody knows what you want. So I'm going to stop there because then we get into, I'm going to get into some exercises with you. But, yes? Yes, oh yeah. Questions, anyone?
The picture you showed of the Boulder committee was all women.
Yeah, problem.
Where are the men?
Well,
Thank you for being courageous.
yeah. It's a great question, and I hope you're from Boulder, and I hope you sign up.
Thank you. I was curious to know what your thoughts on physician-assisted suicide in terms of the conversation.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. I'd like you to answer. No, as an organization, we have no position on it. We've decided as an organization not to take a position on it. But what we do think is that everybody has a right to have this conversation and do what they think is right at the end of their lives. The other piece is that all of these options are important. We're very early out in the healthy stage of where people are having these conversations. And the assisted suicide piece is a very small sliver. And so we are concentrating our efforts over here out in the public square, in the public engagement, and we are very thankful that there are other organizations focusing on that topic.
I think we all can have, decide that we can have this kind of conversation. But how do you ask your parents, right? They will think, are you thinking about us dying now? Or?
Right. So that's exactly the problem. So, you know, the adult children don't want to bring it up because they're afraid that they're pushing the parents, you know, out the door. But rest assured, your parents, everybody's parents, want to have this conversation. So what we suggest as one option, but there are many, parents always want to be parents. Mom, I have this problem. A friend of mine's mother just went through this difficult, and she had this difficult problem with her mom. I don't want that to happen with us. Can you help me? I mean, what mom could resist that? Sure, what do you need? So I think it's also making sure your parents are still in the adult role and in a respectful way. There are other things we suggest. I just went to this lecture. I want to tell you about it. And I got this starter kit. I want to share with you what I'm thinking about. I'd love to know what you're thinking about. And there are tips in here for other ways of doing it. I don't want to pretend that it's an easy conversation. It's not. It's not, because we're dealing with mortality. It's not easy. But I can assure you it's easier to talk about it before there's a crisis than when there's a crisis.
Okay, on the other spectrum,
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on your opinion on how, towards children, what's the age appropriateness to have this conversation, considering?
I think, children vary. Our overarching hope is that we normalize the conversation. So, as children grow up, beginning to talk about death is a part of living, and when the rabbit dies or the goldfish dies, it's that, we closet death now, except with the pets, right? Because used to be, before you all did such a good job, my father, who had 5 heart attacks, would have died on the first one in our living room, but he didn't. He was in the ICU. So my advice is I can't tell you when, but I would say generically, trying to normalize the conversation. And then, our kids are pretty sophisticated. Adolescents, they can handle this. They handle a lot more than this. So I would just know your own children. I didn't have too many rules in my house. It was seatbelts, it was helmets, and it was condoms. And I said, that's it. And they, that's a good question. I don't think so. I don't think so. But I think we all have to know our children, but it needs to be normalized.
So do you educate? So do you educate people on the different options? For example, do you talk to people that have been on life support, have come off of it, what the experience was like?
Say that again?
Have you talked to people that have been on life support and then come off of it, and what was their experience? Being in a vegetative state, are you still trapped in your own mind? Are there ways to mitigate that, to actually get rid of consciousness during that time period? What have you talked to?
No.
Okay.
None of those. It's such an interesting question. Did people hear the question? No. So have we talked to anybody who's been on a ventilator and come off it? Have we talked to anybody who'd been on a vegetative state and come off it? Is that it? We haven't. Except that there was someone here who just told me a story about a ventilator. Was it Mike? Who was it? Oh. Yeah. Wait, can you share that? Or? Sure. Yeah.
So 2 things. So I spent a lot of my life
Why don't you introduce yourself?
So I'm Jamie Haywood, and I did a lot of work on ALS, and there's just 2 quick answers to that. But one was, so my brother was on a ventilator, and he lived on a ventilator for 5 years. And we had an amazing death. Ironically, it was an accident. The ventilator disconnected, and he died. And we were actually able to donate his organs live because his heart restarted after being down for 50 minutes after the ventilator disconnect. And so we did a live donation. It was a very wonderful ceremony going down to do the surgery of that and saving other people's lives. But the thing that I was telling you about earlier that was interesting to me is patients with ALS often ask the question, should I go on a ventilator or not? And there's a few threads on our site, and there's probably a couple hundred conversations. And 2 of them I'll just mention real quick, which is really magical. One is a guy that had decided not to go on a ventilator. And the hospital ignored his wishes and put him on one as part of an acute event. And he was grateful. He saw his child graduate high school and go through an amazing experience of going through that, and he wanted those lives. But then he also reflected that there was a moment after that had accomplished where he'd stopped wanting that any longer, and undoing the ventilator is very hard. It's deciding to die is very difficult than deciding to live. It's a very different choice. The other story that just really struck me, and it's very much the question you asked, was people that go through this choice are afraid of what happens if it does disconnect. What's it like? Am I going to suffocate? Am I going to drown? It was someone who asked the question. I was terrified of that. And there was actually not one but two people, and one was particularly vivid, that described dying. That he'd had his ventilator disconnect, no one had noticed, just like my brother. I read this after my brother died. It was very wonderful, reassuring experience. And he said, there was a brief moment of panic, but there was not. And there was this clarity and this realization that he remembered vividly the whole process of going out. And then he was down 18 minutes and came back. And he told the story, and it was so reassuring to everyone else. So I think that there is an amazing potential for narrative to help people understand the consequence of these choices. And I think that's one of the things that's really missing here. It's not just about the ability to have the wish or express the wish or have it respected, and that's a whole other issue which you didn't cover enough because the system's not very good at doing that. But I think that when you're talking about something you know nothing about, I mean, who knows what it's like to go through a chronic illness? Who knows what it's like to suffocate or die or have pain or all of those things. And so you need the really vivid narrative efficiently conveyed. And actually, there was a guy, something you might steal from, Dan Savage did this amazing campaign called It Gets Better, and it's a message to young gay teens about, when you're going through high school and you're gay, high school's shitty enough as it is, if you're gay, it's a disaster, right? And they wrote this amazing campaign of videos that said, hey, I had the worst experience of my life. I almost killed myself all this, and now I am this happy married person with a kid, and I have this great life. It gets better, and it's a great message. I think that kind of vivid imagery to help people through would be really helpful.
Great, thank you.
Can I follow up with a question?
No, wait. I want to get back to a couple of thoughts that I had in terms of my family, because I promised Larry that I would share some of my personal stories. And to get back to his original question, why is this conversation so important? And so, as I said, my father had 5 heart attacks, and on the 5th one, he was still lucid, but linked up to all kinds of machines, being kept alive. And he said to us, I've had enough. I know that my congestive heart failure has taken over. I'm done. And he said it in a nice way. And he said, the only thing I want now is a corned beef sandwich, and I want all those boxes of chocolates that we bought. I want to personally give it to all the nurses in the nursing station that have taken care of me. And then I want to go. We said, fine, this is your choice. We've talked about it. That's fine. So he shared this with the cardiac fellow. The poor cardiac fellow, I thought he was going to have a heart attack. And he said, Dr. Stern, you're fine. And I could see the nurses station. And so I said to the cardiac fellow, please go and get Dr. Smith, the chief of cardiology, who had been my father's cardiologist for 20 years. Tell him what my father wants. And within 10 minutes, Dr. Smith was down in the ICU. He talked to my father. He unplugged everything. He put his arm around my mother, and he stayed with us until my father passed away. And my father passed away exactly how he had wanted to, with dignity, with the love of his life around him, his children and his wife, with his doctor in the hospital where he wanted to be. And it happened because my father had a great relationship with his clinician, and he had told his clinician and his family what he wanted. So that is one very important reason to have these conversations. Now, I think you were starting to get into the whole sphere of respect within the hospital and the healthcare system. Clearly, it is a big issue. We know that doctors do not want to have this conversation, and Institute for Healthcare Improvement is working with health systems on that. But we have to change the dynamic and the culture. We have to educate our doctors that it is okay to have this conversation. It's not a failure on their part. Comfort care is another kind of care that they have in their toolbox, and it's not a throwaway. And it's not something that you do default, but it is a part of good quality care. And so we know all of that work has to get done, and it's a lot of work. Yeah.
In my own experience, my father's one of 12. I have 55 first cousins. I have no children. I have 10 nieces and nephews. My parents don't like talking about it. I talk about it. I'm the only one of their children that will. The best allies for parents that don't want to talk about it are their grandchildren. My nieces and nephews know what my plan is for my death. They're going to execute it for me because I don't have children, and they're helping me get their grandparents to talk about it. Cousins help too, and so do aunts and uncles. Think about those resources. I don't know in your work, Harriet, if extended families are helping, but we're all part of a community, and it's all about using as many resources as possible.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, is there anybody else that want to share anything before we get to this last piece so you can all have lunch? Anybody, any other thoughts? So usually when we go out and speak, we're not in an auditorium like this. We're usually around round tables with checkered tablecloths, and we do a lot of the starter kit. But I thought it would be really nice if you all could go. You've already done the what matters to me. So let me see. Here's just some examples of what people have shared with us. I want to say goodbye to everybody I love and have one last look at the ocean and 90s music. Or I want to be in the hospital with excellent nursing care. And one of the doctors at Dana-Farber, who happened to be the head of palliative care, had never had the conversation with her father. And he was going into surgery for a tumor on his spine. It was a complicated piece of surgery. And she had said goodbye, and she was driving home, and she sort of went, oh my God, I've never had this conversation. What if something happens to him in surgery and I have to make a decision? And so she turned the car around, and she went back into his room and said, Dad, we've never had this conversation. What matters to you? What's important to you? Just in case I have to make any kind of decisions on your behalf. And he thought about it, and he said, if I can watch football games and eat chocolate ice cream, that would be enough. Now, this is a professor. He's written many books. She was shocked. She had never remembered him ever watching football in his life. And sure enough, the complicated surgery got more complicated, and she got the call. What should we do? And she said to the surgeon, will he be able to have chocolate ice cream and watch the football games? And the surgeon probably thought she was really nuts. And he said, yeah, I think if we do this and this, that's about all probably he'll be able to do. So she said, well, then do it. And it turned out, initially he was a quadriplegic, but then with exercise, he was just in a wheelchair. And he went on to live 7 more years and wrote several articles, and he had his chocolate ice cream, and he lived a wonderful life, for those years. So it's really important. But it changes. Like for my mother, she had 5 cancers, starting at the age of 48. She had breast cancer at 48, woke up from surgery with a double radical mastectomy at the age of 48, and then went on to have 5 different cancers. I bet there are many researchers in this room wish they had a bit of her DNA because they were all primary sites. I'm sure she had something that turned off the growth of the gene. But initially, when she was diagnosed with lung cancer, that was the last one, when she was in her was about 72, 3 years old, she said, I've had enough, and who could blame her? I've had enough. I've been through radiation that was like cobalt radiation, zap, and all the chemotherapy you could imagine. So I said, fine. And she came to visit. She stayed with us for a couple of weeks, and at the time my son was 12 years old. He was studying for his bar mitzvah. She kept hearing him chanting and practicing and practicing. She said, okay, I got to live until he gets bar mitzvah. So they changed with her doctor. She changed the goals of care, and she had chemo. And she lived another about 4 years after that. So really important to listen, to recognize we change as we age, as we go through different life experiences. It's all about what matters to us. And we need to take this back. It's just not a medical decision. It's a partnership. We need to be part of crafting those goals of care. So I'm trying to get all the stories in, okay? So I want you to think in the next 2 minutes. You can even close your eyes. But who would you like to talk to? When would be a good time to talk? Where would you like to have that conversation? And usually at this point, we hand out commitment cards, but we didn't know how well you would feel about that, you scientists, you guys. So it's a little too touchy-feely for you, maybe. So take a moment. Think about who do you want to have the conversation with? When do you want to talk about it? And where? And what we have found is that if you really first think about it, and it's better to write it out, then there's a stronger likelihood that you'll do it in the next couple of weeks. So take a minute. Think about it. Okay, anybody surprised of who they thought they might want to, Anybody want to share anything, their experience about that little exercise? It's okay. It's very private. You don't have to tell your new best friends. Well, yeah?
It reminds me, this is a Buddhist movement, right, Boulder?
Didn't know.
There's a Buddhist quote about physics. For Buddhists, nothing matters.
Nothing matters.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Buddhist physics,
Nothing matters. Okay.
So that's what I don't understand about those things. When you really think about death, it's like you're thinking about life to figure out death. Well, if you really know what death is, which is.
This is really not about death. This is about living. This is about how you live at the end of your life, right? It's like that last month. What we know is that tons of money is being expended at the end of people's lives on futile care that they don't want. If we knew what everybody wanted, there would be so much less surgeries. There would be so many fewer blood tests. There would be so many fewer days in the ICU. But we don't want to lead with that. We don't want to say that out loud, because it sounds too much like rationing of care. But this is good quality care because it's really based on what people want. And when you marry what people want with clinicians who will base their goals of care on what people want, you've got a winning way of providing health care.
Just one comment. You guys must have worked a lot with the hospice movement because obviously they have a lot of things in common with this.
Yeah. We speak at hospice groups all the time. What they love about this, it gives them an opportunity to go to the public and give them a tool to start talking about it early. Because the problem with hospice is the average stay is, 3 days? 5 days? I mean, it's way too late in the process. To really get the biggest bang for the buck for a hospice is to be in it for 6 months, to really get the comfort care and be surrounded by your family and be out of pain. So they do love this. So thank you. Yeah, we work with them all the time. So, okay? Thank you.